And I think a lot of people will have a situation like, oh yeah, my window unit for my AC started dripping down the wall. I saw some mold, I cleaned it up, we're good now.
Yeah, spray it, wipe it, and we're good. Yeah.
I'm here to tell you, that's dangerous. If you see it, it's like a cockroach. Where you see one, there are a million, right? So where you see a little bit of mold, there might just be a mountain of mold hiding.
Today, we're diving into a fascinating journey of personal transformation and health innovation. Our guest is Sandy Martin, the visionary founder of Biohacker Expo. Sandy's story isn't just about overcoming a health crisis. It's about turning adversity into a mission that's changing lives across the biohacking landscape. In a world where chronic fatigue and brain fog are often dismissed as just stress, Sandy's experience offers a wake-up call. We'll explore how she navigated a maze of misdiagnosis and expensive treatments, only to discover that some of the most effective biohacks cost next to nothing. Sandy's journey embodies the essence of biohacking: curiosity, resilience, and innovation. We'll uncover some of the most intriguing and accessible biohacks Sandy has encountered, from simple, cost-effective techniques to groundbreaking innovations. We'll also discuss the future of biohacking, separating the trends from the truly transformative practices. Whether you're dealing with unexplained health issues, looking to boost your energy, or simply curious about the future of wellness, this episode promises to be eye-opening. Get ready for a conversation that might just change how you think about your health. Good afternoon, Sandy. Thank you so much for the time today, joining me here.
Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to meet you, Joe, and be on your podcast.
Of course, yeah. And I'm fascinated by your story, how it led, to sort of biohacking yourself back to health, and later founding your Biohacking Expo. Obviously, you've had some great speakers like Gary Breck, over the years. But could we just start how it all began? What inspired you to get into the world of biohacking? Like the issue you dealt with, the process, and how it helped, healed you.
It happened the way it happens to everyone, because we're all indoctrinated into this standard American blah, blah, blah until something happens, right? So for me, I had this sudden drop in cognition. Over the course of about 2 weeks, I went from running a company, devising new systems, converting something into a new e-commerce platform, top of my game, best work of my life, loving my life, to 2 weeks later, after finishing a project, a major project, 2 weeks later, I couldn't run reports on the system I had set up myself. And so with that, I thought, I must have just overdone it. I must be so stressed. I worked so hard, even though I'm so proud of what I've accomplished, I just burnt out. That must be what burnout is. So I took some days off. Didn't get any better. In fact, I started to feel worse the more time I took off. And so every day that went by, I got more cloudy and more tired. And I had no idea at the time how that could have happened. All I knew was I worked really hard, super proud, 2 weeks later sick. It took me months to realize. I went through my phone. I went through all of my history. I was trying to document what was going on. I went through my YouTube history, my Amazon history, my phone history, and I happened to find in that 2 week period, I was reminded that I painted an area of my home that I later found out had mold behind the walls. And I didn't know to look for that. I didn't know there was mold back there at the time. It wasn't until I came across Dave Asprey, as I was in my 6-month journey to figure out how to be well, I came across biohacking and Dave Asprey, and he told his story of mold, that I was able to walk it back and figure out, aha, let me test for that. And that ended up being the case. But along the way, I knew that I was tired and I couldn't think. I was 45 at the time, and so very easy to assume it's perimenopause. Very easy to assume that it was COVID, even though I wasn't sick. Very easy to assume that it was burnout from work. I had so many things that it could have just been, and I just needed to rest, just needed to get over it. But it wasn't any of those things. And I started when I thought it could be just something simple, like overly stressed. I bought a V-Light. It's a photobiomodulation helmet. I went to a neurologist. Neurologist misdiagnosed me and administered the SPECT scan wrong. Your audience has probably heard of Dr. Amen. And
Daniel?
Yeah, and the SPECT scans that he does on the brain. I didn't want to travel because I wasn't yet a biohacker, so I was scared of the virus. So I didn't want to travel in that period of time and go to Atlanta for a scan, so I had it done locally. But they didn't do it like he does it. So they didn't perform it correctly, so I got erroneous results. And so they put me in a room where they injected the nuclear tracer after I had been lying down, meditating with my eyes closed for 15 minutes. So on a SPECT scan, that's going to lower the oxygen consumption, the activity in the front of the brain and in the back of the brain. So it looks like a head trauma. So I got diagnosed with hitting my head. And I was like, but I didn't hit my head. He goes, but you clearly have a traumatic brain injury. I was like, but I didn't hit my head. And so he just assumed that I didn't know I had hit my head. He prescribed a drug called nimodipine, which is given to stroke victims. He prescribed it off-label. And he said this opens up the blood vessels in the brain. And on top of that, thank goodness, he sent me to a hyperbaric clinic and recommended neurofeedback. So at the hyperbaric clinic, I had to get cleared. And when I talked to that doctor, he asked me what protocol was recommended. I told him, and he said, oh, Dr. So-and-so. And I said, yeah. Well, how do you know that? He said, well, he's the only one that recommends that drug. Exactly. And so then I was just terrified of what would happen if it was maybe just like, like a doctor going rogue. First I'd ever heard of that. And so I told my then husband I wouldn't take it. He took me back to the doctor. They both insisted I take it. They tried to just every tactic in the book, and I didn't take it. And that was my first act as a biohacker. And so that's why when people ask me what biohacking is, I say biohacking starts with no. Because if you're still within this paradigm of the standard American lifestyle, standard American diet, you're not a biohacker. And so you have to say no to authority. You have to say no to the food pyramid, no to the FDA, no to all of the things that are keeping people inside a paradigm of profit for insurance and pharma. You have to break out of that mindset in order to even start biohacking. I mean, you can do some red light and some PEMF and some oxygen therapy and call yourself a biohacker. If that's just additive and you're still eating nachos at the Mexican restaurant, you're not a biohacker. Because you got to say no to that.
Yeah. What was it that brought you to actually discover what was behind your wall? I guess that's where my mind goes.
Once I've heard Dave Asprey's story.
Yeah.
That's when I was able to figure it out.
Okay.
So I knew that I had detected a little bit of mold, but I didn't. As you were
painting.
I took a picture on that day. I had seen a little bit of something, saw a little bit of mold, and then that I saved it, and I thought, oh, maybe there's moisture here, and I took a picture that there was moisture. But I'm still not processing like it's dangerous, right? I didn't know mold was dangerous. So I knew something was there. I didn't know the extent. I didn't know the kind. I didn't know how much. And I didn't know it could take my brain out. And so and I think a lot of people will have a situation like, oh yeah, my window unit for my AC started dripping down the wall. I saw some mold. I cleaned it up. We're good now.
Yeah, spray it, wipe it, and we're good. Yeah.
I'm here to tell you that's dangerous. If you see it, it's like a cockroach. Where you see one, there are a million, right? So where you see a little bit of mold, there might just be a mountain of mold hiding. And that was my case.
I didn't know about the coercion between your physician and your former husband, but it sounds like from there, you went on a very expensive expedition from there, right? In trying to heal yourself.
I did. So the most expensive thing I bought was a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. I bought a hard shell 1.5 ATA chamber. That was $27,000. Now that seems really excessive, except I was prescribed $20,000 worth of treatments. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just spend the extra $7,000. Maybe this will help my husband. Maybe this will help other people. I'll be able to use this for longer than just 20 sessions. I think it was 40 sessions was going to be The total was $20,000. And so 27 seemed reasonable at that point. And I was running a company and my brain was running the company. Like, it was important for me to be sharp. And so let's go after the brain. Let's fix the brain. I started with light and with oxygen, and the trouble with mold, I didn't know that it was mold when I bought these things. The trouble is that if you go too hard and too fast after mold, it fights back. And so I got these massive headaches in the chamber that I just stopped using it. And, had I taken a slower approach and tried it out at the clinic, maybe I would have figured that out and I wouldn't have spent $27,000. They didn't have clinics in 2020 that had mild chambers, at least not in my area. There are a lot of places nowadays that do. But I was going to go under pressure to ATA. And even the doctor was like, that's not really good for the brain. And so he was discouraging me from doing 2.0. And so having the brain fog and maybe an inclination to just over attack an issue because of my position in the company, we invested. And then when the year was over, I looked at all the supplements, all the devices, all of the things, and that's when it added up to $97,000 in the first year.
So, and that's you just experimenting over and over, trying to figure out how can I beat this, but not overdo it at the same time, and kind of get yourself into an area where you're able to run this company, but able to sort of heal your injury that's going on. So beyond Dave, was it just trial and error that sort of led you to recovery?
So Dave was how I figured out what was wrong. So I finally found somebody who could test me for mold. This is where I got ripped off by functional medicine doctors. Love functional medicine, but in a cash pay model, in a situation of desperation, there is too much incentive for them to over-test and over-prescribe. And so my first functional medicine doctor was not outrageous. I spent a couple $1,000s with her. My second functional medicine doctor, when I had to fire her, which is a whole story into itself, my second doctor took me for $13,000 first day. And I was so desperate at that point. And I just thought, well, I finally know it's mold. I need whatever answer I can get. He charged $600 an hour and then ordered tests that were thousands of dollars and multiples of these tests. And then they didn't even analyze the tests for me because that was going to be $600 every hour he spent analyzing the tests. And so we would have a little sit down and he'd try to skim over them. And it was as bad as a 6-minute doctor visit with a GP. It just was pointless. And so my genetic test to find out if I had the gene that didn't process mold very easily, he never told me. He tested for it and never told me if I have it. I still don't know if I have it. I don't know how to read the tests. Mm-hmm. And I have access to people who know how, but turns out I healed. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. But the first functional medicine doctor prescribed an antifungal that caused the mold to fight back. And it was not part of the regular protocol. She lied to me saying it was. It's not the Shoemaker protocol. She said it was. Not that there isn't controversy in the Shoemaker protocol, which people who know anything about mold have heard about. It gave me suicidal ideation for the only 4 days of my life. And so I called her and I said, I can't take this drug. And she said, at that point I was desperate. I took whatever the doctor prescribed, but I was like, no, I'm not taking this again. And she said, well, I told you would need mental health help to get through this process. And I said, no, that's not how this works. I don't go talk to somebody about how I'm feeling about a drug's side effects. This is not what I'm going to do. And that's why I had to go to the second doctor. And when the second doctor was obviously trying to exploit me, I just quit. And I had to do everything myself. The thing that I think is really important about biohacking in the story is that none of the biohacking I did before I was able to start detoxing did anything to actually make me feel good again. It didn't clarify my cognition. It didn't boost my energy. I started with my diet. I switched to paleo and then keto and then intermittent fasting keto. I was doing some of these biohacks with the light and the oxygen, but I was still struggling to stay awake past 7. And so there's this difference in approach between biohacking and functional medicine, and I think each faction needs the other. You could try some light therapy, and if you don't feel better, maybe go figure out what's wrong. So it doesn't hurt anyone to try these biohacking techniques. But if the problem is that your body is inflamed, which is what happens with mold, you've got to get to the reason your body's inflamed. So you can't just reduce inflammation. You've got to figure out what caused the inflammation. And so then we get to the root causes, and that's what functional medicine is about. But you have to find somebody who really wants to dig in.
Yeah, which seems like you couldn't.
And if you try every therapy at once, you don't really know what fixes it, so you never get to the root. And so I'm happy to say that biohacking does help, and I'm passionate about bringing these techniques to people, and especially the way I'm doing it by putting on an event to put all the techniques in a room, because one of the reasons I spent so much is because I just had to read online testimonials and figure out what I wanted to try next. And that's hard. It's hard to make those decisions, and sometimes we overspend. I have a couple of devices I've never used because they just once I got them here, the shine wore off, and it was a little harder to get started with it than some other things, and so they're kind of collecting dust. So if people are interested in what biohacking can do for them, there are clinics in town, there's events like mine where they can walk the room and try some things out.
Yeah. I mean, and then so what ultimately led you to feel better at that? Okay, I'm back, I'm running my company, whatever it was is not there anymore.
Well, I'll say I never went back to running that company. I tried. I kept trying to go back in, kept trying to help, but the mold changed my personality, and everything that I had constructed in my identity to make me an effective executive, everything I was doing to operate that company got real quiet when the mold took over my brain. And then when I rebuilt myself, I was softer, less inclined to be extremely stressed, more present. So the analytical side of the brain and the presence side of the brain, they don't really operate simultaneously. So you'll hear people talk about how busy their brains are and they have a hard time being still. People who have an easy time being still don't tend to have a lot of anxiety. They don't tend to get caught up in their thoughts. And so I was more present, and then that didn't fit the culture anymore. It didn't fit my marriage anymore. It didn't fit any of that. We were business partners and married. And so all that kind of fell to the wayside. And I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to work during that period. And then when I got divorced, I was like, I need to work again. And I started Biohacker Expo at that point because we'd been running large Comic Cons together. And I had 50,000 attendees over a weekend. And that was the old game. And then I thought, well, I know how to run an event. Let's see if maybe I can put this towards something that I'm really passionate about, and let's see if we can get people healthy.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I guess maybe one door closes, another two, right? Like you kind of found yourself into this world of putting on expos, but using that experience in your own health history. So how did you start the Biohacking Expo? Because I learned about it, and it looks like a really exciting event every year in Miami. Maybe in the future you'll take it other cities, but for now, Miami. How did it lead into that? Obviously the Comic-Con experience helped, but kind of like merging the two worlds together.
Well, people call my event the Comic-Con of longevity because it's kind of, it's really different in how experiential it is. And we even had William Shatner in the first year. And we biohacked him on stage. This year I
saw the videos. Yeah. It's very cool.
He's really funny. Yeah. He's hysterical. Yeah. This year we have JP Sears, and, we're just making light of health, because it's almost so serious a subject that if we don't make light of it, then it can just be a little depressing sometimes. And so I think if we can laugh at ourselves, then we'll feel a lot better about all the changes we're making. The simple answer to the question is I had been running events in this building since 2009. I had a relationship with the building. I knew the pricing. I knew everything. And I was just like, let's sign an agreement. And then it was about, okay, so how do I position this to the world? How do I get my message out? One of the hardest lessons for me that I learned in the first event was that if you don't feel good, you don't want to leave your house. And so I was trying to reach people who didn't feel good, telling them that we had things that would help them feel better. They didn't want to leave their house. And so that was a real sticking point to get that first event off the ground, was how do I fill the room when I'm trying to reach people who don't want to go anywhere? And so this year, I think the answer to that question is to reach out to the people who just got a little healthier, right? Like they just figured something out. And it's like that person who just lost a bunch of weight and they want to tell everybody how to do it, or that first person who just got stronger, that just, whatever it is. I think the keto and the carnivore people are the most enthusiastic, right? They just want everybody to understand how good they feel when they go keto or carnivore. And then they can't shut up about it. That's my real audience. And that and health coaches, I think, are really the core, because that's a group of people that's trying to help people understand how to be healthy. They're trying to reach the people who don't want to go anywhere. And so that's what we're working on this year.
Yeah, because you've had a lot of, in your life, obviously, influential people in this sort of biohacking space. For people listening, that maybe don't have the in-depth knowledge of all the devices and all the people who they should be paying attention to, are there like innovations and influencers that maybe made an impression on you, having been so involved in this? Like who and what we should be looking out for currently in the biohacking world?
I love that question. Gosh, I have like 10 different people I want to tell you about. I'm going to try to keep it to 3. One of the first videos that changed my life was on impact theory with Tom Bilyeu, and he was interviewing Lisa Feldman Barrett. And they were talking about the brain and brain energy. This was before I met Chris Palmer and read Brain Energy. This was very early on. He asked her what she would say to her daughter if her daughter said she was depressed. And she said, I would have her mitochondria checked. And I was like, what? And so I had not remembered the word mitochondria from high school. And so I looked it up, and then, it's the powerhouse of the cell, which barely gets to the point of the mitochondria. But in that moment, it showed me that there's more going on inside the brain than neurotransmitters, than serotonin. It's that we've been talking about it in pop culture with this oversimplification. And so that opened me up to exploring more. And from there, I discovered Dr. Mark Hyman. And this was 4 years ago. So Mark Hyman now leads a company called Function Health, which tests for tons of biomarkers at a rate, it's like $500 a year. Yeah, that if I had that, I could have saved $13,000, right? Like there's a lot of things we can do before we go see anybody that will bridge that knowledge gap and empower us as individuals. That said, I don't think every home test is best done at home without guidance. So I took a heavy metals test when I was sick before I found out that mold was an issue. And I tested so high in arsenic that the lab technician called me and said, I'm not supposed to call you, but you have so much arsenic you might just die. And so I went for a jog the day before, and then I'm told I might die on the phone the next day. And so have you heard of the nocebo effect? That's the opposite of the placebo effect. It's where you thinking you might die can actually kill you. They've got all these cases where if you think you're going to die, you might just die, just from the thought alone. And so I found a clinic in town that could do chelation, but they tested my blood before they did it. And so the blood test said I was fine. But the stress I felt from hearing I might just die, that wrecked me for 3 months. Getting that amount of stress out of my body took longer, I feel, than detoxing the mold. It did take about 6 to 12 months for me to really get to a point where I felt like I was operating back at a semblance of normal. But to further answer your question about who to follow, I think Andrew Huberman has helped me probably more than any other person in terms of just solid, scientific, great content. I've watched so many of his podcasts. Yeah, I think that Tom Bilyeu, Mark Hyman, and Andrew Huberman were the most impactful for me.
And what about like tech innovations? I know you've tried a lot of devices. You have, like you said, that kind of experience at the expo. Are there devices that you're most excited about currently?
I love the LumaFlex.
Oh yeah, John.
Yeah, I used to have it on my desk. Yeah, being able to just apply red light anywhere in my body. I think he just won an award at CES for that
Yeah, we have one.
device.
Yeah, yeah.
The newer model can get plunged underwater.
Yeah, submersible. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such cool technology. I think anything that is like really measuring biomarkers is very interesting. There's a metabolic thing called Caliber that is sits somewhere between Lumen and Pinoe. You know, one's for really high-end metabolic discovery done in clinics, measures VO2 max, and the other's just kind of for ketosis. Sits somewhere in the middle of that, and the price point's right. There are some really interesting things emerging, and I think the trends are bringing the cost down to be in the home of the consumer. So I have a sauna that I spent $500 on. And they're typically, I mean, I probably got a good deal, but
yeah.
It has a broken zipper. Yeah.
That's okay.
I think I got a discount because of the broken zipper. But yeah, my first sauna was $5,000. That was part of that first year purchase. But this one, I shouldn't have even gotten an enclosed sauna because I was breathing in the mold I was detoxing. And so it's important if you have a really big issue of detox that you have your head out. So I have one of these little portable ones and my head sticks out. And I still detox, but I'm not breathing it back in as part of the process. But I think that AI and the personalization we're going to get out of AI is going to change everyone's lives in about 2 years with medicine. And then beyond that, it's just everything's going to shrink and get less expensive and move into the home. And I would like to bring up the word of caution that Brigham Bueller talks about, what we can talk about in terms of AI and testing and things like that. So, for example, if you get a genetic test done that says you have a pre-existing sensitivity to something, your insurance company might drop you. There's a point at which we have to make a decision about how much we're going to keep private and keep to ourselves and how much we're going to bring an insurance-covered doctor into. And so, as people are starting to do this, maybe you don't take your genetics to your GP and let Aetna, United, etc. have that on file. Maybe you keep that private. A weird thing to think about, but I think that's where we are.
I do too. Yeah. Have you seen, like, over the years, devices or, innovations that maybe seemed experimental at the time become more mainstream? Like, I drive down the street, I see cold plunge centers and saunas, right? Whereas a couple years ago, people would be like, oh, I'm not getting in an ice bath. What sort of hacks that used to be, okay, this is a little off, is now mainstream that you've seen?
No, I'm so new to biohacking. I don't know that I can answer that from an historical perspective. I did hear recently that in Brian Johnson's documentary, he talked about having the most aggressive rapamycin protocol. Rapamycin is a drug that suppresses the immune system and has been associated in some clinical studies to show maybe it can affect longevity in a positive way. And then after the documentary came out, he came out and said, I stopped taking it entirely. And so I think that from my perspective, I would be most interested in what we're ingesting that might be experimental because, I mean, from my perspective, antibiotics are biohacks, right? Like 100 years ago, they doubled our lifespan. And if we had any kind of pharmaceutical right now that doubled our lifespan from 120 to 240, we would call that a biohack, right? And so even though we demonize antibiotics now for the havoc they wreak on our system, they're biohacks. So I would consider almost anything in the pharmaceutical industry having the potential of being a biohack. Now, something that is just symptom management doesn't meet that threshold. But if it can eliminate cancer, or if it can, there are all kinds of things that pharmaceuticals can do, but then they have the side effects and all the things. And I would say that anything ingestible is what worries me the most. And I don't have an opinion about gene editing yet. It's too soon. I know that that's on the horizon, and sometimes it's being done therapeutically for real issues like insurance covered issues. But sometimes people are doing it like Brian Johnson just to perhaps have more muscle mass. And it's an experiment and we don't really know. The thing that I think people are most scared of, that I think is the most promising, is exosomes. Because people call them stem cells. They're not actually stem cells, but they are derived from birth tissue. And they're myosin chemical stem cells, but not really a stem cell. It's not embryonic, and it doesn't really have a cellular structure. It's a package. It's an exosome. It carries information. And those signals from the birth tissue are able to heal the body in ways that we've never seen anything ever do.
And it kind of was making me think, people see influencers talking about things that might be extreme, that even you might think, all right, this is a little bit off, right? How do you sort of dispel, like for someone listening, is it a trial and error thing? Because at some point you could argue, I guess, there could be risks to just believing everything you see. And someone says, this is going to help you. This is going to cure you. I've done this and it worked for me, so it's going to work for you. How do you sort of feel about that? Like, how do you personally vet those every time you see something pop up? Like, do you have a process that you go through?
That's such a good question. And it's hard because the last weird thing I saw was Andrew Huberman on Joe Rogan talking about how long he stays in the sauna and at what temperature. And Rogan was like, are you sure? Man, that sounds like, I wouldn't do that. And so when you have Huberman on one end, who's like the brainiac, and Rogan on the other, who's like the fittest man I've ever seen, doing the most aggressive biohacking therapies, and he's like, I don't know, that seems a bit much. It's hard to know. Like, how does a regular person, we want to say, well, my doctor, this is another example on Rogan. Mark Zuckerberg had knee surgery and didn't use peptides to heal. He revealed this on his interview with Rogan last week. And Rogan was like, you don't like healing? And so he goes, man, I'm just listening to my doctor. He's like, you sure? There are other kinds of doctors out there, you know that, right? And Mark was like, yeah, I'm good with mine. And Rogan just let it go. But you've got two extremely smart people with completely different points of view. And I don't know that there is a solid way for us to just vet one thing or another. From my perspective, it comes down to a gut check, right? Like, what feels right for me? And then if you're trying something that's like on the edge of recommendations and you're pushing limits, monitor with an Oura Ring, an Apple Watch, there are all kinds of ways to monitor, test often, monitor your biomarkers. If you're doing extreme things, is your inflammation going up, right? Like, that would be something, perhaps that's the kind of thing Huberman could test for. Like, he could test his inflammation before and after 3 months of extreme sauna therapy, and then that would be real, verifiable, evidence of whether or not it's doing something positive or negative to the body. Ginfinity has a test that I really like. It's their advanced panel.
Yeah, I talked to Dr. Shi.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah.
He tests for 5 inflammation markers in that test, and senescence and clotho. And so that's a great way to know what you're doing to your body.
Yeah, it's like trial, error, and tests, like kind of see what worked for you, but make sure you're measuring if it is or isn't, and adjust accordingly. Yeah,
maybe that's the only way in the future we'll know, is just by testing. And hopefully the cost of the test come down. I mean, that's an $1,100 panel. And so I'm not going to do that every quarter.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're going to be doing these every few months, it's going to add up, right? Not 100,000 almost like you went through, but
and I'll never do that again. Yeah. Had I known then what I know now, it might have cost me 10. Maybe. Yeah. Being really aggressive might have cost me 10.
Yeah. For someone who might be new to the industry and they're listening to you and they're kind of taking it all in, checking some biomarkers, and maybe I'll try the keto for a couple of months or whatever. Where would you sort of say a good place to start for someone that's just getting started in this world?
I think getting started means figuring out what the first, second, and third things are that you're going to say no to. If I were to give you 3 off the top of my head, I would say phthalates, so the fragrance chemicals in the shampoo and the hand soap and the candles and the deodorant and the perfume, in the dryer sheets, in the detergent. All that has to go. All of that stuff is destroying hormones. It's wrecking sleep. It's wrecking sexual function. We've got 20-year-old men with the testosterone of 80-year-old men because of the toxins in the environment. And so I would say no to chemicals in your home first and foremost. I think the second thing is to say no to seed oils. I think that they're blocking the cell's ability to communicate with all of the organs and the endocrine centers of the body. And so our cells think that they're under more stress than you're putting your body under if you're eating seed oils, because they're just not getting signals to and from one another. And so they're just not producing the same kind of energy they could produce if they weren't. And I think probably fixing sleep. So if I'm going to stick with the say no theme, I would say no to blue light. So I've got my yellow glasses on right now because I've got a bright light shining on my face. The screen's bad enough, but this LED light coming at me could really disrupt my circadian rhythm. I have a particular protocol that I use if I've really messed up my sleep. So I'll start with red for the first half hour in the morning, go to amber for a half an hour, go to these light yellow ones for most of the day. Don't use a color around noon. Don't block any blue light around noon for about an hour. And then go back in reverse, light yellow, amber, and then red. And I go from in a 2 to 3 hour window late at night, amber to red, and red for an hour before sleep. And that tells the body it's time for bed. And the body knows how to sleep. But when we stare at a phone at night, just doom scroll in bed, we're telling our body it's noon. So we have to say no to that too.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. That's great advice. I mean, it's definitely simple, achievable things that people can do today. That's nothing that they need to go out and spend, because part of what you say is, a lot of these biohacks don't cost as much, right, as people would think. It's not $100,000 worth of biohacks.
It's not. And I think if you replace everything that smells nice in your home with something that's naturally smelling nice instead of artificially smelling nice, you're probably going to spend about $500 replacing cleaners and shampoos and soaps. The glasses are going to run you, if you buy both kinds, they're going to run you about $80 each for each color. If you have to get prescriptions, it gets a little pricey, but if you want to track your sleep, you can spend $400 on an Oura ring. If you can add things that help for sure, but I would say probably beyond the no, it starts with tracking. That would be the next level of biohacking. And then once you have really dialed all that in, the red light's going to work. The cryo's going to work. The oxygen therapy is going to work. The PEMF is going to work. It's not going to work as well if we're eating the nachos. It's just not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And how about for people who they want to listen to more of you, learn more about you, attend the Biohacking Expo? Where would be the best place to check? And I'll put these links in the show notes, of course, but to connect directly with you offline.
Yeah, biohackerexpo.com is the website, and you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, if TikTok's still here next week, and Facebook, everything at Biohacker Expo.
So cool. Thank you so much for your time today, Sandy. Just learning all about what you've been through, sharing that with people is, that's really admirable. So thank you for that, and great to meet you and learn more about you. And, I'd love to attend your expo and 1 year, so we'll stay in touch, but thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much, Joe.